Okay, so it's a couple of minutes past the hour, and we have quite a few attendees already in the event. So welcome again to everyone. Thank you for joining us for our second ever webinar from the NHS Sustainability Partnership. We appreciate you taking the time. We know that everyone is quite busy right now. So we'll do a little bit of an introduction to NHS Sustainability Partnership. And then luckily for me, I'm going to pass over to our partners at PHS Group, who are going to be running the majority of the session today. And then we'll finish off with a Q&A. So please be jotting down your questions throughout and ready to pose them at the end for the panel session. So to give a bit of an introduction to NHS Sustainability Partnerships, it's myself and my partner Nathan, who's on the call today. Give us a wave, Nathan.
Hello.
Thanks. It was formerly the NHS Sustainability Day of Action. If you were on our webinar earlier on this year in January, you would have found out a little bit more about what we're looking to do this year. Not to overcomplicate this session too much with that, but we do have a lot of other events and content and things coming up this year, as well as the actual Day of Action itself, which is now on the 4th of June. Nathan and I decided to take over the Day of Action and rebrand as Sustainability Partnerships because we feel like sustainability is absolutely number one on the agenda across the board, not just within the NHS. We're very, very lucky to be in a position where we can work with people like our partners here at PHS to talk about things that are very high on the agenda of the people within the NHS and those who are suppliers to the NHS as well. Today's event is hands-face-based, but what about the air we breathe? So it's all about air purity, air quality, talking about how great new technologies can bring about efficiencies and also greater air quality. We have people on this panel who can speak to that effect a lot better than I can. So without further ado, I'm going to pass over to Claire, who will be your chair for the rest of the session until we go into the Q&A. And please follow us across our social media and also visit our website. I'm going to go on mute now and pass over to you, Claire.
Okay, good morning everybody and welcome to today's session. As Georgia just said, hands, face, space, but what about the air that we breathe? So I'll just, before we go into the main subject matter today, which is air purity, I'll just give you a little bit of history on PHS, just in case you're unaware, so I can set the scene for you, so you can see why we actually are in a very good place to talk about this. So PHS is a leading hygiene services business. We have operations across the UK, Ireland and Spain, so we do operate in Europe as well. We have a unique fleet and an operation centre network across the whole of the geographical, that's a big word, geographical area that we cover. 3,000 employees, and over 50% of our employees are actually out servicing customers, so they're customer facing people, and we are visiting 120,000 customers across a large number of locations, which is about 300,000 locations. So we are visiting a lot of people every day across the country. So COVID-19 has had a widespread and indiscriminate impact on health and society in every organisation. And I think we're all very, very aware of what's happened in the last 12 months, and it will continue for a significant amount of time as we try to go back to normal, as we're all coming out of lockdown, etc. And we all heard the discussions this week and announcements from the government. So we are very, very aware. So with many changes, organisations will be defined, they'll be making decisions on how they're going to respond to COVID-19 as we see it today, and how they're actually going to operate during these unprecedented times as we come out of lockdown, as I said. So organisations need to, and are very aware that they have to safeguard themselves and their stakeholders and their employees and visitors to their premises. So as I briefly said from this slide, PHS services 120,000 customers, 300,000 locations. So we are working to help organisations, our customers and other people to be able to come back out from lockdown and feel safe, and for organisations to be very well positioned to give people assurances. So I'm going to hand over now to Chris Brown. Chris Brown is Head of Public Sector for PHS, and he will talk a bit more about that scenario for us. Thanks, Chris.
Great, thank you, Claire. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. So as Claire's already mentioned, I think it's fair to say 2020 and now as we go into 2021 has been an extremely challenging time for everyone. There's no question that COVID-19 has forced almost all of us and every organisation to think differently, to evolve our working practices and to find new ways to counter the threats and issues that have been raised by the pandemic. We've all faced challenges that I think, at least for our generation, have been unprecedented, balancing the need to continue working and providing services whilst being in some form or other of lockdown, and missing the day-to-day social contact that defines us as people and as a community. It's presented us with personal challenges, professional challenges and issues, and perhaps now more than ever, we're having to really think about how we can protect and safeguard our colleagues, our customers, our patients, our stakeholders, as Claire said. It's a primary focus for all of us. So in order to bring some clarity to the kind of ever-evolving and fast-moving picture presented by the pandemic, we actually commissioned some independent research to find out how people felt about being in indoor spaces and what their perceptions and fears were around being in indoor spaces in premises that they would normally, pre-COVID times, feel very safe attending. We actually did some research back in the summer of 2020, which was looking at buildings and the impact of the pandemic on the closure of buildings and the reopening of buildings. That provided us with very useful information, but we then wanted to take it a step further and find out, how did it impact on people's thoughts and their perceptions and their feelings? So that's really what we're talking about today. So in September 2020, we commissioned this research with 2,000 independent people, and they told us how they felt about being inside these buildings. As you can see, 68% of the respondents were concerned about catching COVID-19 in indoor environments. Basically, we now know that has a very large impact for us. We know that we're making progress, but it's going to have an impact on us as we look to lift the lockdown, as set out by the Prime Minister on Monday, and the impact that has on public services. So, as I say, the research was independently conducted with 2,000 people. A further 23% were very concerned about catching COVID in an indoor environment, and 54% were more concerned when we conducted the research than they were pre-winter. So we did the research in September. They were thinking about what it had been like in the summer months, but as we were going into the winter months, and I guess we're still in them, even though the weather's slightly better, people were very, very concerned about being in indoor spaces. Can I have the next slide, please, Ashley? Thank you. So the impact for that for public sector, as you can see on the slides there, are that people are slightly wary, if you like. They're nervous about being in these indoor spaces. And although we've had the highly impressive rollout of vaccinations, there will definitely remain a level of concern amongst people who have to return to environments where they might feel that they're more susceptible to contact with others and an increased risk of potentially contracting the virus. So this does have an impact as a safer public sector as we begin the phase lifting of lockdown. We return to schools, we start to get GP surgeries open, people start going back to the dentist, etc. And we go back to our normal work environments. I'm sure many of you, like me, have been working from home for a good number of months now. And this is important, of course, because we have a job to do to help rebuild public confidence in using public services, and also making our staff and our colleagues feel safe and well protected whilst performing those services. So Ashley, can I have the last slide, please? Thank you. So I think most interesting from the research were the reasons why people were concerned about being in an indoor environment. And for me, the two things that stand out there are the 26% not trusting the measures that have been put in place, and 23% not knowing enough about what the location's done to make it COVID secure. So I think what that shows us is that visibility of solutions and how people's perception, their perception of those solutions have been put in place is really important for building up confidence around COVID security. So I'm just going to pass over to Ashley, who's our air quality specialist, and he's going to talk to you a little bit more about the airborne threat. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. just needed to take myself off mute there. Apologies for that. So good morning, everyone. PHS have been operating in the area of air treatment for around 4 years. And as for myself, I've been promoting clean air for nearly 6 years, and it's fair to say that the last 12 months have certainly been the most eventful. I don't think that COVID needs any introduction, and we're certainly in a tough phase at the moment. But I think with the vaccine and the recent lockdown announcements, there's hope and certainly light at the end of the tunnel. I think it's well recognised by all the professional bodies that the airborne threat is a real and significant threat, and we've all got a collective responsibility to make environments and spaces that we share as safe as possible. And it's worthwhile setting the scene, because when you look at our daily consumptions, on average we drink around 2 litres of water a day. We eat around 2 kilograms of food a day, and we actually breathe around 11,000 litres of air every day. And that's just when we're doing what we're doing now, just sitting around talking in meetings, you know, shopping, whatever we're doing. Now, businesses spend individually thousands and thousands of pounds on filtered water, be it bottled water or filtered water in their offices for their staff to drink. Yet tap water is perfectly safe to drink. Quite rightly, we spend millions, if not billions of pounds a year on healthy food. But to date, bearing in mind the amount of air that we need to breathe, businesses spend very little on filtering the air that we breathe. So it's really important, I think, to set the scene. If we go back to COVID now, there's been a lot of research out there. Originally, when COVID first surfaced back in February, March, the message was around transmission through surfaces and touch, and that we needed to wash our hands. But there's a lot of research out there now demonstrating that the most common form of transfer is through the air. And the one and these are just, you know, parts of the research that are out there, but the one that really resonated with me, I've spent a lot of my working life in shared offices, was the 0.5 on there, call centre outbreak. One infected employee on a floor infected around 40% of his colleagues in a week. So that really resonated with me. And I think it's really important that we recognise that. And as I said, the research out there is allowing us to do that. If we look now at how COVID is transmitted through the air, there's been a lot of talk about mask wearing, and that's right, because masks prevent a lot of the droplets from getting out into the environment, and those droplets are the particles that we normally emit when we sneeze or we cough. So they're the bigger particles that the coronavirus is carried in. What they're not as effective at preventing is the smaller aerosols that we emit when we breathe or we talk in getting out into the environment. Those smaller aerosols are the particles that stay in the air for the longest, and the smallest, so they travel the furthest and they stay in the air for the longest. Now, what I'm going to take you to now is some research that was done in Spain, which is really, really interesting research. It was commissioned and released in October, and it talks about how coronavirus spreads in an indoor environment. So if you just bear with me, I'll take you to that bit of research now. Hopefully you can all see that. Now it talks about a small room in a home, it talks about a bar, and it talks about a classroom environment. But these indoor environments can be any indoor environments of varying sizes. So the first bit of research they did was looking at if there is one person in a small room, in a living room in this instance, but as I said, it could be a small meeting room. So patient O is the infected person. So over a 4-hour period, without any mitigation, everyone in that room will be infected. Okay, so we bring a mask into the equation, and it only prevents one person potentially from being infected, and that comes back to the smaller aerosols that I was talking about earlier. We bring ventilation into the equation, and that significantly reduces the airborne threat. Now, there's a few things that, a few variables that need to be working in our favour for ventilation to work effectively. Temperature needs to be working in our favour, as does wind and wind direction. And also, it's not just about an opening on one side of the room. The opening has to be on both sides of the room so that the air can travel through the environment. And that's really important. If that door on the other side of the room is closed, yes, there'll be dilution, but it will still limit the ability of those virus particles to move out of the room. The other thing that's really important as well is that that opening on the other side of the room also needs to be to the outside. The reason for that is that contaminated air can just be pushed to other parts of the building. So when we're talking about fresh air ventilation from outside, they need to be most effective. There has to be ventilation on both sides of the room. So that's in a small room setting. So if we now look at what I was talking about before in terms of aerosols and droplets, as I said, the droplets are those particles that we emit when we sneeze or cough. So the virus is carried in larger particles. Now, it's quite alarming to realise that for every one droplet that we emit, we actually emit 1,200 aerosols. So that's why it's really important that we understand, one, how viruses can be transmitted, and two, how we can mitigate their effects and impact. And this infographic is really good in demonstrating how the virus remains in the environment in a poorly ventilated area. So over an hour, the aerosols just continue to increase. So a really good infographic to show that. And the next illustrations show the difference. Sorry, I've gone on a bit, I was a bit too eager there. So the difference when we're just silent and breathing, and then when we become more expressive, we shout or we sing. And I haven't sung in the office for a long time, but there you go. It makes a huge difference, up to 50 times. When we become more expressive, we start to talk more loudly, or indeed we sing. So it just shows how much, how important it is that we deal with those smaller aerosols. And those dots you see on the screen aren't...
Sorry, we've just lost your screen there. I think that you may have dropped off the internet. So would you be able to show your screen again?
Yeah, sorry. I don't know why that is. Let's just... the wonders of modern technology. Is it back? Great. Sorry about that, guys. So each of those dots is not one single particle, it's an infectious dose. So it's a collection of particles. So if we then look at a slightly different setting, a bar or a restaurant, again, we've got patient O in there. So patient O, of those 15 people in there, will infect potentially 14 of those customers. We bring masks into the equation, reduces the infection rate to around half. And then again, the right sort of ventilation, either natural or mechanical, will significantly reduce the potential for people to become infected by those virus particles. And finally, a school, and this one resonates with me because my wife's a primary school teacher. Again, the same principle here, significantly more, the potential for infection is significantly higher, the less mitigation there is, effectively. So I think that's a really good piece of research which demonstrates to us how viruses can be transmitted, and in this case, coronavirus, through the air. So I'll reshare this. And the CDC in the US did some research as well a few years ago in terms of confirming that influenza the most common form of transfer is also through the air. And what this diagram is just showing is that those smaller particles, those aerosols that I talked about, are the ones that stay in the air for the longest and travel the furthest. So just backing up again, what the research shows in Spain. So interestingly enough as well, over the years, and as I said, 6 years for me, but for significantly longer than that, people have talked about outdoor pollution, when in reality, indoor air is significantly dirtier and more polluted than outdoor air. If we look at some of the things, some of the problems that are created, if you look at bacteria and viruses, before this pandemic, there were around 50 million influenza sufferers in Europe every single year, 50 million every single year. And interestingly, we've learned to live with that virus because we understand it better and we know how to treat it. But in reality, there is still a mortality rate. People still die from influenza. But COVID has changed how we view germs and viruses now. Allergens is another issue. So again, around 50% of the population of Europe suffer from one kind of allergy or another. In Britain, that's around 43%. And those allergic reactions aren't always debilitating. You know, they're not serious allergic reactions, anaphylactic reactions. They can be, you know, minor headaches. To give you some indication, I have a minor allergic reaction to scented candles, just get a headache. Not particularly debilitating, but that's my allergic reaction to something that's out there in the air. And then you've got pollution, so you've got outdoor pollution coming into our buildings through ventilation, so through HVAC systems and through open doors and windows, and also VOCs. So VOCs are what we call volatile organic compounds, and they're solids or liquids that turn to gas at room, vaporize and turn to gas at room temperature. So simple things like opening a tin of paint, that smell we get that might give us a headache is a VOC. My allergic reaction to a scented candle burning is my allergic reaction to that VOC. And obviously we've got odors as well in buildings, but all of that within a commercial or a work environment, if you like, really comes under the heading of staff well-being. And companies, even before coronavirus or COVID, were starting to take staff well-being far more seriously than they did previously. Lots of companies now, rather than just giving staff well-being the responsibility for staff well-being to HR or to an operations or to FM, are actually employing people specifically to be responsible for staff well-being. So it's becoming more and more important. And look, cleaning the air has got far more broader benefits, and it needs to be a far longer term strategy than just dealing with the here and now and just dealing with COVID. Things like increased productivity, reducing staff absenteeism and indeed presenteeism. All of this, improving the facilities perception, it creates a much more positive, health-focused environment, leaving people feeling happier. And as I said, generally improving the perception of the facility for both staff and visitors, and that's becoming more and more important. And something that I've noticed probably over the last 2 or 3 years, but certainly in the last year, is that air within a total hygiene strategy is becoming more and more important. People are moving away from a reactive approach and are starting to take a much more proactive approach to the occupant's health. If you look at how this category has grown within PHS, we were seeing steady growth over the last 2 or 3 years, but it has really exploded over the last 12 months as a direct result of COVID. But I think it's really, really important to remember that this needs to be part of future-proofing our facilities and part of a long-term strategy because of all the additional benefits that cleaning the air brings. And this slide is a really simple illustration for me. But what it does, it highlights the need for not just surface cleaning and hand sanitisation, but air purification as part of your total hygiene strategy. And it's becoming clearer and clearer with more and more research out there that the transmission through the air is the most likely and common form of transmission of the coronavirus. And look, I'm going to talk to you briefly about a solution that PHS have got now, the Aeromax solution. And I'll start by reiterating that it's not the solution, it's very much part of the solution. So having an air purifier with HEPA filtration that can remove the vast majority, 99.97% of harmful contaminants such as germs and viruses and bacteria from the air, is crucial, or a crucial measure, I should say, in terms of protecting against the airborne threat. I'm going to very quickly talk to you about how it works. Basically, it sucks air in. It's got a very high airflow capacity, so it sucks air in through a series of filters. So the filter at the front of the unit is a basic filter that basically removes the larger particles and contaminants. There's a carbon filter in there now.
Sorry to interrupt, Ashley.
Yeah.
I'm not seeing your slides move. I don't know if everyone else is, but I'm not seeing the slides move. So
what is the slide on now?
2 to 5 times dirtier than outdoor air. Sorry, that's what I can see. Just making you aware.
So yeah, you've got the pre-filter there, which captures the larger particles that I started talking about. You've then got the carbon filter, and it's the carbon that deals with odor and VOCs, so the volatile organic compounds. And what carbon does, it captures the odor molecules. They attach themselves to the surface of the activated carbon. Carbon's a well-known and trusted filtration method that's used in things like cooker hoods, sewage treatment works, vacuum cleaners, etc., etc. So if you can just press the button again, Georgia, please. So it's the HEPA filter that deals with the particulates and captures those particulates in the air and removes them from the air. This particular HEPA filter is coated with an antimicrobial coating that restricts the growth of the bacteria and mold that it captures. Doesn't do anything with virus particles, but they need a host to reproduce, so they just die off on the filter anyway. Just press the final button if you would. Thanks, Georgia. And finally, there's a bipolar ionizer in there. So what that does, that electrically charges those really minute particles that might escape the filtration process, so it will catch them on the next time it goes through the filtration process, because what they do is they attach themselves to larger particles. So it's complementary, but just reinforces the whole process really. So that's in brief how our solution works. And there's lots of research out there from the CDC in the US talking about the importance of having an air purification solution with HEPA filtration, particularly in poorly ventilated areas. And indeed, our own government scientists in SAGE have recommended air purification again in poorly ventilated areas. Sorry. So there's a lot of research and data out there to talk about the need for additional mechanical filtration to reduce the spread of germs and viruses. And again, looking at the long term. And just so, I think just to summarise, I think it's acknowledged that the airborne threat of coronavirus is real. I think we need to consider more than just hands and surface cleaning, particularly when all the research out there now is confirming that airborne transmission is very real and is the most common form of infection. And I think we also need to include air hygiene in our long-term strategy when looking at how safe our indoor environments are. So, look, thank you for listening, and sorry for the technical hitch. And I'll hand back to Georgia now for any questions.
Thanks very much. Let me just get this presentation out from my screen. Perfect. Thank you. And don't worry too much about that. Luckily, we were there ready with the backup. So yeah, really appreciate your time on that, Ashley. And I think that one of the things that really struck out to me personally, and it's to do with NHS sustainability partnerships. And it's in that when we took on this mantle and we looked to create conversations around sustainability, it's not always necessarily about the true ecology element of sustainability. It's about creating sustainable working environments for people to create, as you mentioned, long-term strategies and future-proofing the way that people live and the way that people work. And I feel like, you know, we've talked about the air purity being such a huge element in terms of just health, mental health, physical health, and there's no one that we need to look after more than the people on the front line. So I really appreciate your time and explaining through all those things there, Ashley. So I wonder if anyone has any questions, please put them into the Q&A. I'm going to start off with something about that quite topical right now, and it's that the kids are going back to school. So there's a lot of smiles around, people thinking, yes, finally. I don't have to worry too much about that myself, but a lot of people are very happy about kids going back to school in March. The first in a long line of great new things coming from the government in terms of the easy lockdown. And I just wondered, in a school setting, for example, I know that government say that you know, it's a great idea to just open windows. But for me, I think, you know, there's a lot of inner city schools where actually if you opened the window, maybe you'd be getting worse air, especially at the beginning and the start of the day, where I know that the air pollution around schools with parents dropping kids off and buses and all that kind of thing, actually it may be more detrimental. So I'm just wondering if any of you guys have any thoughts on, you know, the effectiveness of just simply opening a window.
Yeah, I think George, you've hit on a really good point there. In certain locations, opening windows can mitigate one problem, but actually exacerbate another. So that's a great point. And the government advice isn't wrong, because opening a window will certainly dilute the opportunity for the transmission of the virus. But it is, to a certain extent, the right conditions have to be met. And as I kind of talked about when we were looking at that Spanish research, one, it depends on the weather conditions. So it works more effectively if it's colder outside than inside, because cold air is denser than warm air. So the cold air will move the warm air out of the room. But just as important is wind direction. And probably at least as important is that there's an opening on the other side of the room so that the contamination can be moved out of the room. And that opening has to be to the outside, because otherwise that contamination will just be pushed to another part of the building. So whilst as I said, the advice isn't wrong, I don't think they've gone far enough in explaining what conditions need to be met for it to be at its most effective, would be my answer there, I think.
Yeah, if I could just add to that, actually, I think it needs to be part of a wider strategy, a wider hygiene solution. Yeah. Because I think the schools is a great example, but obviously hospitals, doctors, surgeries, dentists, you name it. You know, having a group of people in a relatively confined space, just wiping the surfaces regularly, having masks, sanitizing hands alone, as the infographics show, won't necessarily provide the level of protection that we're all looking for. So it is kind of like a wider, for me, it's taking a wider view and a long-term view as well. And some of the research that we've done in terms of cost of unit and things like that means that, you know, I looked at this for schools, for example. You can protect a pupil for 3p per day with this machine. So a class of children can be protected for 3p or less per day using this machine, which I think is great value.
Yeah. Did you have any points on that, Claire?
I think if I can, yeah, it's just adding, you know, one of the very early points that Ashley said about filtered water. So in any environment today, we all expect that we can enter somewhere and have access to a water fountain of some description. So we have access to clean filtered water. And it makes you think about, that's us looking after ourselves, so we're all hydrated and we can remain well for the day, and we can concentrate and do what we need to do during a day. And but air quality is as important. And I think one of the final points that Ashley then talked about was, it's not clean air isn't the only solution, it's part of the whole solution. And Chris has just talked about that as well, with hands and face and sanitizer, etc. But for me, personally, we expect filtered water, we expect to be able to get to it wherever we go. We should also be making sure people have that comfort that the air that they're working in, or leisure time, or educating in, is good as well.
Yeah, and I wondered as well what you guys think about this kind of terminology like HEPA filters and things, because I've bought a Hoover recently, and I would never thought, oh, I need to make sure that I've got a HEPA filter on my Hoover. But as soon as you start researching into this stuff, it's like, and you look at all the reviews and everything, it's like, okay, it does actually make sure. And I got rid of my old I won't say the brand, but one of those really expensive ones, and bought a new one for 150 quid. And oh my God, the difference in the air, you can feel it in the air. And it's these sort of HEPA filter things. And I wonder if you guys think that this type of terminology is being more used within the general vernacular for the general public, and if people are becoming more aware and are likely to become more aware of these types of things in their daily life in terms of their air quality.
Definitely, Georgia. People are starting to, I'm having conversations with customers now, and they're asking the types of questions they're asking are making me realise that they're actually doing their research now. So they're asking far more knowledgeable questions of me and of our account managers when they're out there in the field, when they want to understand how the units work and how effective HEPA filtration will be. So there's a far greater understanding now of HEPA filtration. We've had HEPA filtration in our hand dryers, for example, for a number of years anyway, just because we've known the benefits of cleaning our hands drying our hands with cleaner air. So, but there's far more knowledge out there because people are doing their research. There's lots of technology out there, and people are doing their research now. So absolutely, yeah.
Okay, great. And if anyone does have any questions, I don't want to be the only one just having my say on this. Something else that came to my attention, one of our clients, they're a chemicals company, and they've developed a paint that actually pulls in VOCs from the air. The paint actually absorbs it on the walls. So the conversation is much wider, I think, and a lot of people are starting to think more about it. What I wanted to delve a little bit more into is about being a little bit more proactive about COVID-19 in general, and sort of safeguarding ourselves for the future. And if you guys had any more points on that future-proofing front that we've gone into.
I mean, Ashley, I'll jump in quickly and then you can put me right if I go wrong. I think, Georgia, it's probably, as I previously mentioned, it's very much about the kind of holistic approach. So obviously the hands and the surface is critical, and we've seen that. I think the NHS, where most of our attendees are from today, were early adopters of that a long time ago, when we've had MRSA outbreaks, and they've adopted hand sanitizers, hand sanitizing stations, and all the protocols, infection control, for many years, and they could teach us far more about it. But I think making the air purification a key part of this, and it's now starting to come from government as well. We're seeing it slowly start to be mentioned by government, that we need to really think about ventilation of buildings. We need to think about air purification as part of our normal day-to-day process for creating a safe environment. What we do know is that the COVID, sorry to keep mentioning it, it's endemic, it's here to stay. We're going to have to manage it now. And we also know that we've probably been lucky in the past that we've avoided some of the other outbreaks of respiratory illnesses that haven't made it to the UK. So this has been coming. It's a shame that it's come now and we've all had to deal with it, but there are likely to be future things that are going to come up as well. So I think sort of starting to take that longer term view, It's going to be really important for public sector organisations, hospitals, obviously, doctors, surgeries, schools. I mean, it's across the whole piece. Think about how we can really start to future-proof our buildings and our working environments.
Can I?
Yeah, I think it. Sorry, Nathan.
Going to add something from, obviously COVID's a thing, but people forget about the common cold and just regular flu. And as a business owner, I've got like 30 staff at Imageco, and in the past, someone's got flu or cold, and that's kind of just escalated through everyone. Suddenly you've got guys off work, productivity, you mentioned earlier, that just drops, and then you kind of see, as your business, you start to struggle. So you kind of having that purification in there will hopefully help eradicate that, as well as COVID, but because none of it's going away. So I think it's important that everything's addressed.
No. Yeah, absolutely right, yeah. Nathan. We've actually got our own solutions in our own head office. A drastic reduction in staff sickness from having that. So I see we've got a question from one of our attendees as well. I just wanted to point out.
I noticed that one. I'm on that one next.
No problem. But yeah, it's a very good point, Nathan. I say it's not just about COVID. It's about any airborne threat, basically any viruses. So flu, etc.
Did you have anything to add to that, Ashley, before we move on?
No. I think Chris covered it. All I was going to say is I think it needs to be, from a hygiene perspective, part of our normal operating rhythm when we're looking at our hygiene strategy. But I think Chris articulated it very well.
Good. So from one of our panelists, we're talking about the lovely damp weather, which will definitely carry on. We've got right through to April showers before we start thinking about a drier time in the summer. Do we need humidifiers and or purifiers? Should we have both in our offices and our homes? If anyone wants to jump in on that.
Yeah, I think humidity is an interesting and a good point to raise, because it's something when we talk about air quality that's often missed. Because if the air becomes too dry and humidity drops too low, germs and viruses can spread more quickly. So the optimum, and it depends on the environment, but the optimum humidity level is somewhere between 40 and 60%. If it starts to drop below 40% down to 35%, 30%, germs and viruses can spread far more easily. So humidity is something that should really be looked at in any work environment. In terms of, yes, definitely offices. Homes are an interesting one. In terms of domestic, there's a lot of domestic air purifiers there on the market. And what people tend to have them in their homes for at the moment is to reduce the symptoms of allergies, because obviously they're taking the impurities out of the air that trigger allergic reactions. So that's the main reason that air purifiers have been bought for home use is to deal with allergies. But absolutely, air purifiers should be in every indoor setting, really. There's an argument to say it should be in every indoor setting. We're a very, very long way away from that, but you could make an argument that it should be in every indoor setting, every shared space.
Sorry, Chris, did you have something to add to that?
No, I didn't. Sorry, I was just shuffling around.
Sorry, I thought that you were coming on. That's okay.
No.
Okay, cool. So let me go back to, and I know that unfortunately we weren't able to see all of the slides for the solution that you guys were going through today, Ashley, but if you can tell me a little bit more about the solution that you were talking about. Is that something that needs to be integrated? Is it like HVAC, or is it something that's portable that can be taken around from one place to the next?
So ideally, you're looking at, because we're looking at cleaning the air, it needs to be a permanent solution. Once you remove it, it stops cleaning the air. So if we're looking at it as part of a long-term hygiene strategy, it's a permanent solution. So it's yes, it can be floor standing, but it's most effective if it's installed into a unit, into an environment. It's retrofitted. So because it doesn't need any external ducting, it's simply cleaning the air. So the air comes into the front of the unit, is taken through a series of filters, and is ejected out of the top of the unit, and it's a continuous cycle. So it's most ideally it's wall mounted. sensor technology in there, so it's measuring room activity, so it works harder or less hard dependent on the activity in the room. But the most important thing is wall mounted, and it's a permanent solution.
Okay, cool. So thinking on behalf of any of the facilities managers that might be listening in, what you're saying is, like you mentioned, it's retrofittable, but there's no need for any external pipes. You know, it's super easy and simple to install, and then you let it go. And is there anything that you, in terms of maintenance, do you have to be replacing the filters, and what type of cycle are you looking at for that?
Yeah, so it simply needs a power source. That's all it needs. We'll install it, and then in an office setting, it'll be an annual filter change, which we'll facilitate as well. So PHS will install it and maintain it. So and the machines are well made. They come with a 5-year warranty. So the manufacturer backs up the quality of the machine with the warranty.
Ashley, just something from me as well. You can explain this better than me, but I think it might be quite useful. You've explained this to me in the past about how the machine changes the air within an environment. Are you able to
okay, yeah. So one of the things that's really important within an indoor setting is that we change the air as often as possible. And what I mean by an air change is the whole volume of air in an environment taken through the filters. So the machine will actually filter the whole volume of air. Now, it might need multiple machines in an environment, but you're looking at a minimum of 3 full air changes every hour. So the whole volume of air filtered in a room once every 20 minutes. And the importance of that, if you go back to what I was talking about how long aerosols can stay in the air. Aerosols can stay in the air for hours. Those really small, fine particles travel the furthest, they can stay in the air. So to put things in perspective, if I'm sitting next to you, Chris, and I sneeze, the chances of you coming into contact with a virus that I'm carrying are very high because you're sitting next to me. But what we're looking at is removing the virus from the air so that it doesn't travel as far across a room. So you're protecting other people in the room, or people that are coming into the room later on in the day, 20 minutes, half an hour later, from coming into contact with the virus. So it's really important when you're looking at solutions that they've got a really high airflow. So you should be looking at the machines with the highest airflow. And you can get that off the tech spec, but yeah. So air changes are really important. If you're not getting the right level of air changes, the technology within the machine is almost redundant.
Right.
It's all about getting the air through the filters as quickly as possible.
And I think it's really interesting, one of the points you raised earlier as well, Ashley, about air movement across both sides of the room, so air doesn't get, you open a window, but if there's only one window, the air can get trapped in the other corner. If you think about lots of educational buildings, hospital, NHS type buildings as well, where you've got rooms inside buildings which have no windows at all, they do need solutions, don't they? Because they haven't got an option always of a window, an external, to the external environment.
No, you're right. And as I said, it's quite an emotive issue for me because my wife's a primary school teacher. So she's opening the windows, but it's having minimal effect because there isn't an opening on the other side that she can open. So, it's quite an emotive subject for me.
We've got a couple of more questions here. One about when the filters need to be replaced. I think that you mentioned that it was an annual thing, didn't you, Ashley? And then, if so, how often? And then also about the long-term maintenance in terms of contract for the one-off purchase. And also, and what I'm interested in as well is the disposal method of the filters.
Okay, so I think I've covered off. Normally, it's so PHS will provide these units on a maintenance contract. So we will install and change the filters on an annual basis. So we take all the hassle away. And the units, because they've got that sensor technology that I talked about earlier, and they monitor the activity in a room, we install them, we switch them on, and then there's no further interruption needed by the client. So installed, they'll see us once a year to change the filter, and that's it. Disposal method of the filter is just normal landfill at the moment. So that's just how the filters are disposed of. From an environmental side of things, it doesn't tick that box, if that was what the question was looking for. Are there any case studies on the impact that air filtering technology have had in a hospital setting? It's very difficult to measure air quality without lots of technical bits. And look, I've done lots of air quality testing in the past, but it's been very rudimental in terms of, I've got a particle counter which actually measures the amount of particles in a litre of air. We do the testing pre-installation and post-installation, and we'll see a significant reduction in those number of particles in the air. But all we're doing that for, and all we've done it for in the past, is to demonstrate to the end user that the machine works. So we've got a number of case studies now that show that. So, and we've got there are a couple of case studies in medical settings as well, but there's lots of science out there now which proves the efficacy of HEPA filtration in removing the germs, germs and viruses. There's a study by NASA. There's, as I said, SAGE have got information on their website confirming that HEPA filtration is something that should be considered in poorly ventilated environments. I know that the manufacturer is currently testing against human coronavirus, and we expect those results imminently. And the unit has actually been tested on its efficacy against the H1N1 flu virus, and showed that it was 99.99% effective in capturing the H1N1 flu virus in an indoor setting. And the importance of that is twofold. Particles in the air behave in the same way. So if it captures one virus, it'll capture another virus. And also, the H1N virus actually is very similar in size to COVID or coronavirus. So there's a lot of scientific data out there now that backs up the efficacy of air filtering technology.
That's really interesting. I'd love to see the NASA study. I can't imagine an environment that would need air filtration more than a space shuttle. No. So that's really cool to hear. I want to finish off with one quick question that I'd like to hear from all three of you, if you can. And it's about the importance of well-being, and just talking about air purity's role in that on a short and long-term basis.
From my point of view, I mean, I think I covered it in the presentation earlier. It's all about it's all about creating a more positive and health-focused environment. But it's about, for me, it's about protecting the staff and making the environments safer and better for the staff to work in. And as I said before, and I think Chris has mentioned this before as well, it needs to be part of a long-term strategy. Because, as Chris said, we're talking endemic rather than pandemic now. So people's view has always been short term when they were looking at the pandemic and how quickly can it be resolved. But I think ultimately there are too many unknowns now with COVID still. The vaccine's there, but we don't know how the virus will mutate. We have an annual flu vaccine, but it still infects and kills people. So there are a lot of variables there that basically means that this needs to be a long-term strategy. Part of your long-term hygiene strategy, I think, would be my final comment.
And I think as well, if you think about people, our own individual well-being, we've all learned over the last 12 months that we should look after ourselves. This pandemic has taught us that we need to keep well and healthy. So if we do become ill, we can recover quickly. But we're still all in a position where we aren't going inside non-essential buildings due to lockdowns, but we should be comfortable going to the doctors, we should be comfortable going to the dentist or into an enclosed healthcare environment in a building, because that's the structure of the buildings. And you know, I keep referring back to the point of we all expect to get our hands on filtered water. I think there's going to be a very high expectation for people that they want to know and feel. And Georgia mentioned about the Hoover and feeling the change in the air with a HEPA filtration in. You can, when these units are operating, you can feel you're in a clean air environment. And I think that's really important for people to be comfortable when they walk back inside a building in a healthcare environment, that they can feel clean air.
Yeah, a great point, Claire. And I think I'll go back to what I said, Georgia, in my sort of opening. It's the visibility and the perception piece as well. I think it's just really important that people can see what you're doing about cleaning the air in that environment, and also probably something that Claire touched on, the kind of the importance of our frontline staff and how interconnected we all are. I think the thing that coronavirus or COVID-19, the pandemic, has shown is how much we rely on each other. And so it's just so important now, more so than ever, that we're really looking out for each other. So I think they're the two things that I would comment on. And also, I would just like to add as well, if there's anybody listening, you know, I think that it was a great question about case study. If there's an organisation out there that's interested in working with us, we can certainly look at something with you to put a case study together. I'd be more than happy to work with you at looking how we could do that. So please get in touch with me directly if you'd like to have that conversation.
Okay, perfect. Well, we're just about at the end, so I want to give a huge thanks to everyone at PHS Group. Thank you so much for all of your insight today. It's hugely important. It's part of the sustainability agenda, as I mentioned, not just in terms of the green agenda, but also just ensuring that we are creating a sustainable future for everyone within the healthcare system. So thank you so much for your insight today. This whole, and obviously thank you so much to everyone who has attended for all of the great questions that we've had through as well. This whole session has been recorded. We will be editing this and adding to the NHS Sustainability Partnerships website with a full write-up on our blog. Please make sure to follow us on social media, visit our website. There's a lot more events coming up over the next year, including the day of action itself on the 4th, and we're looking for as much engagement as possible, as much collaboration as possible, so that everyone has the ability to engage with us on that front as well. Okay, so we'll leave it there. Thanks again to everyone for attending and our great panelists.
Thank you.
And we'll see you next time.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.